Good luck, everyone. You're not on your own. We have Thomas from Free League here, as well as Jeffrey Lewis from Community Content Program Canon Plus for Twilight 2000. And I'm Daniel Roos of Spelkult, and we will try to learn everything there is about the future for Twilight 2000. I hope. Should we have a short introduction, or was that enough?
Tomas, do you want to go first?
Oh, I can go first. Yeah, sure. I'm Tomas Härenstam, one of the co-founders of Free League and one of the co-writers of the 4th edition of Twilight 2000. And yeah, happy to be here and talk some Twilight 2000.
Cool. Again, my name is Jeffrey Lewis. I'm a part of the fan community. Worked as the lead designer on the Canon Plus project and as well as the Referee Aids project. First, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. This setting in this game has been really close to my heart ever since I was a little kid. So seeing it picked back up by Free League has been super, super wonderful. So thank you, guys.
Cool. Thank you. Happy to hear that. I'm the same way. I mean, that's kind of why we brought it back up. I mean, it was one of those games that I enjoyed a lot way back then, and I felt, really, when we got the chance to actually do a new edition after some talks with the license, and I actually managed to get to do that. So that's a bit of a passion project for me.
It's very cool. There's no other kind of post-apocalyptic settings quite like Twilight 2000. Taking place right kind of in the middle of the fall. So very cool to see it back.
Should we make some introduction about the Canon Plus project to start? That was the reason for this interview at first, I think.
Sure. Maybe we can even start with some broad questions that'll maybe lead into that and the reason why we ended up building it. So Tomas, one of the things that we noticed when this new version came out was that it felt like the older versions felt a little bit more global in scale. And I was curious to know, first and foremost, I guess, if you all see the Twilight War of 4th edition as being on that same type of scale, as seeing it as kind of a true global conflict, or if you see it more kind of a little bit more centralized just into Central and Eastern Europe.
I mean, yeah, I think we see the setting in general as global, just in the same way as in the previous editions. So I think the fact that we didn't dive very deeply into that in the core game is really, it's for other reasons. Primarily, we wanted to focus the game on those settings, the Polish and Swedish settings that are kind of the main, where the game will be set. Primarily, at least the core game, that's kind of where we focus. So we felt that we wanted to put our effort mostly into that, even though there are some descriptions of what's happening throughout Europe. There is a short section about the US, and so other regions are mentioned, but only briefly. But that's we have always felt that we need to have a focus in kind of the official stuff that we do. Primarily, it's going to be Northern Europe, and that's kind of where we put our focus. And then so this is really cool to see this Canon Plus project and other initiatives to kind of flesh out the rest of the world, because we felt that was kind of the idea, that we'd focus on, well, Northern Europe, Poland, Sweden maybe, and then basically leave to the community to develop the rest of the world to a large extent. And that's very cool to see that that's happening. That's exactly kind of what we had in mind, and that's why we didn't want to flesh it out too much in the core game, because that would also create boundaries and limit what the community could do. So that's another reason for not having too much there. But you can always discuss, should we had a bit more, maybe we should have, maybe not, I don't know. But still, that's kind of where that was the thinking, that we wanted to focus the game and leave the rest of the world to the community mostly. We have discussed some other geographical expansions maybe at some point. We can maybe get into that a bit later, but so But yeah, overall, looking at the world, I think it's great to see the community picking that up.
Cool. Yeah, that was a lot of the inspiration behind the Canon Plus project, just getting it out there and trying to, I guess, piece apart what might be happening elsewhere in the world, and for those referees who might want to play elsewhere, give them that opportunity. That kind of leads me into a bit of another question here for you. I know that looking over the releases so far, with the exception of Black Madonna, it seems like the other releases are kind of following the same release order as some of the classic modules for like the original game. I guess, can you speak to that a little bit? Was that planned? Should we expect kind of that trend to continue as we move forward?
Yeah, there is definitely something to that. I always really enjoyed those first, 3, 4, 5. I mean, the initial. I think the rest of the stuff that was made was great too. But for me, kind of that is really kind of the core of the Twilight 2000 experience. So that's kind of where we wanted to go. And but the only thing we wanted to do differently is kind of broaden the scope a bit, and that's why it's not as focused geographically. Basically, the urban operations does describe Krakow, but also another town in Sweden, and also has a more general approach towards urban warfare and urban situations and how to play in cities. And the same thinking went into Hostile Waters, which was kind of our Pirates of the Vistula, but also with a broader scope. So that's what we wanted to do, to kind of follow that original trilogy, because I think they kind of form a kind of a trilogy, and then but broaden them to make them more of a sandbox tool set more than a complete adventure campaign. So, and yeah, that is the plan to continue. I mean, the third one in that series that we have planned is called Operation Reset in our version, and it will have some similarities with the Ruins of Warsaw, even though it's not going to be identical. It's definitely going to have some of that. We'll have like large scale battle rules and things like that. So it will kind of go into the same type of themes as Ruins of Warsaw had. I think the Black Madonna was back then and was this time around as well a bit of a one-off. But I think releasing it a bit earlier this time makes sense, because it is set near Krakow, southern Poland, and that one is, even the new edition, also geographically focused on that particular area. So, and that is close to Krakow. So if you're playing urban operations, it kind of makes sense to have, if you want to throw that into the mix, it kind of makes sense to have it there. So whereas perhaps if you then move up north to Warsaw or something like that, then it might be harder to get the Black Madonna in there. So that's why we wanted to get that out. And also, of course, since the Black Madonna was a Kickstarter stretch goal, so that meant we wanted to have it out even earlier, but for a variety of reasons, it took a bit more time than we had intended. But so yeah, basically we are following that original kind of line of expansions. The old Going Home module is actually now included as a plot in Hostile Waters, so we probably won't make a whole expansion out of Going Home. Probably that's not entirely decided yet, and after that we'll see what happens. I mean, we have always discussed doing something about America, I mean the US or North America in general. We're not there yet, but I think it makes sense, since so much content for the original game was made for the US and North America. I think it would be cool to do something for the new edition as well. And that's something I know that Chris Lights, who did a lot of the setting work for the expansions, most of it, is also really interested in doing. So that's definitely something we're looking at, but we're not right now. What we're working on right now is Operation Reset, is like the next one in line. So that's the one we're focused on at the moment. But after that, I think the US and North America makes sense as the next step.
Yeah, awesome. I know that I had reached out to Chris while we were writing Canon Plus and just asked, hey, we're going to be covering 10 or 11 different regions in the world with that project. Are there any that Free League would like us to maybe veer away from? And the US was one of those areas. which is a fan and somebody who lives in the States. That was very exciting to hear. That's good to know. Are there, I guess, understood that that's off in the future at some point. Are there other regions that, if you had a magic wand and could do any regions in the world, are there other regions that you might want to consider touching on in the future if you had the ability to do so?
I mean, definitely. There is a lot of cool stuff that could be done, but I don't, whether we'll actually get around to whether that would be possible, I don't know. But I mean, personally, I used to work as a foreign news journalist in the Middle East. So for me personally, I think doing something in the Middle East would be interesting. Kind of tricky considering politics. So it would be, you have to navigate that pretty carefully. But if that would be doable, I'd be interested in exploring that. So that's one area that I'd be interested in personally. But that's not an active development like that.
Understood. Yeah.
Personally, what I would find interesting.
Very cool. Excellent. Daniel, I know I'm asking a lot of questions. I don't want to.
The scene is yours. I think I only have a few rounding up questions.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so interesting. So one of the pieces of information that we gleaned pretty early on, I think from the forums, was regarding the development of NATO and the timeline for 4th edition. And I know that was one of the areas that seemed to veer a little bit from the older editions, specifically with regard to France and Greece and I believe some of the others. Can you speak to kind of that decision process, and if you can provide any additional insight on the development of NATO in the 4th edition timeline?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we did, of course, look at the old editions, primarily 1st edition. To be honest, a little bit less of 2nd edition. I did have the 2nd edition and enjoyed it a lot, but I think kind of 1st edition had more of a special place in my heart. So that's kind of where we went and looked at more. But then, I mean, regarding the kind of general backstory and the timeline they presented back then, of course, some things in there, a lot of it was great. Some of it felt maybe not very plausible in hindsight. It's easy to, there were some events there that we felt didn't quite might work. And also, we had an idea early on regarding the 91 coup. I mean, we wanted to have, that was an idea that came along very early to use that coup, the Moscow coup in 91 as kind of the jumping off point where actual history and this game history kind of diverted from each other. And of course, having that as the point of divergence, of course, meant that the timeline up until then would be different. And we had the fall of the Berlin Wall had happened and other things. So that meant the Warsaw Pact was not a thing. So of course, that meant a lot of changes. And of course, some of those changes also touched upon the development of NATO. So I think that's kind of the reason for those changes that you see is kind of where we decided to kind of split true history from game history.
Cool, very cool. So I know that looking at the timeline, with the Soviets, their economy really starting to pick back up, and I think it was like 94 or something in 4th edition. It very much feels like it's, I guess in 4th edition, it feels like it's very much like a come as you are type of conflict. And that was definitely, it was great to read about. But I wonder, one of the pieces of feedback that we've seen from the community is just related to, the Soviet Union or reconstituted Soviet Union being able to take on what is effectively like the entirety of NATO in the West. And I think in the book it mentions the Soviets have at least a couple of allies, specifically like in the Middle East, like you said, right? Like I think it's Syria and Iran. Are there any other allies that, in your own headcanon, as you've seen as being a part of that that kind of Soviet alliance, or
some other tricks up their sleeves?
Yeah, I mean that is clearly, I mean, overall, that was an issue that you're right, that came up a lot during development, after the Kickstarter, and when we had the alpha and the beta, and also after the release of the full game. Kind of how would it even be possible for a Soviet Union to do this, to kind of challenge all of NATO, basically? And of course, there is always some element of suspension of disbelief. I think you kind of have to accept that as the premise of the game somehow.
Sure.
So to some extent, you'll just have to kind of accept that is, because that's kind of the premise of the entire game, basically. But that said, of course, we wanted to make it at least reasonably plausible, and that's kind of where we, had that. Some things that where the Soviet military was rebuilt faster. There are some things about this that will actually be a little bit further explained in future expansions. So there will be a little bit more. It won't be like the whole explanation. But there will be some more to this that will actually get a little bit more background to it than is kind of in the core game, regarding how the Soviet military and the Soviet Union in general can kind of bounce back in this way. There is some more to it that I don't really want to get into just yet. Another one of these after Operation Reset is out, and then we can talk all about it a little bit. Under wraps for now, but yeah. So there is that, and when it comes to kind of alliances, we haven't spelled that out. I think in the original version, there was first, I think the Soviet Union went to war with China. We don't have that happening here, and of course that would obviously be a change that would give, of course, that would stretch the capacity of the Soviet forces less if they didn't need to fight it like a two-front war, and instead could focus entirely on going west and on Europe. So of course that's a difference. We haven't really gotten into details on that, but I don't think we haven't envisioned a war between the Soviet Union and China in this edition. That's not part of the canon in any way.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I have a quick follow-up question, because I really need to try to push some hints at least about the Operation Reset, because there are some debates whether you're going sci-fi or not, because of the illustrations in Urban Operation, I believe, of the fringe scientists and the actors. Will there be any sci-fi or time travel elements to the?
Again, I don't want to go into spoiler territory, but I think it's also mentioned in both Urban Operations and Hostile Waters that plot that you can use if you want to, the Operation Reset plot. It goes kind of to the fringe of science. It's what I can say. It won't go full on sci-fi with characters time traveling back and forth or anything. That's not where we're going. But there is still things that might kind of be at the very edge, or even to some extent beyond the edge of kind of current actual science. So it kind of goes into that kind of territory without going full on sci-fi. That's kind of as far as I can kind of go at the moment. And that can definitely be potentially, I think for some players, they might not want that at all in Twilight 2000. I would not even want to go near that kind of theme, and that's also because why we want to make this plot completely optional. You don't need. There's plenty to do, and many other plots to play, and so much else to do if you don't want this at all. And even in the expansion, Operation Reset itself will have lots of material that you will be able to use. You will have descriptions of Warsaw and Stockholm. You will have mass battle rules, lots of other stuff that you can use, even if you don't want to go use this plot at all, if that's not what you want in your game. But I think for some Twilight 2000 players, I think they will hopefully find this plot kind of interesting and fun to play, and not veering too far into sci-fi territory. Very
cool. I know I'm definitely looking forward to Operation Reset, and of course, whatever happens beyond Operation Reset. One of the things I wanted to touch on while we have you, Thomas, is the actual, I guess, kind of how things played out in Eastern Europe, right? One of the things we noticed while writing Canon Plus is that the units that you all have selected, are, I mean, first of all, the orders of battle, I would say it seems like they're, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, they're more realistic than any of the prior games, which is really cool to see that come to life. And I noticed that, when we were kind of deconstructing what you all had done, it seemed like the military advisor you had worked with pulled all the units from, was it the Group of Soviet Forces Germany, for the most part in Poland? Without diving too much into the actual orders of battle themselves, is there, I guess, one of the questions that came up was regarding Finland and kind of what happened to Finland, right? I know in the canon material, it seems like Russian tanks just kind of steamrolled through Finland directly into Sweden. And I'm kind of curious to know, if you have any thoughts on that, or if you have any further information you might be able to share with us related to Finland specifically.
Yeah, I mean, that's very cool. I mean, of course, you know all about the Finnish Winter War and during the Second World War and so on. And I don't think the Finns would kind of lie down and be steamrolled. I don't think history has shown that's not what would happen. So, and the fact that there is a mention of that when of Soviet armor going in through northern Finland into Sweden, I think that is actually a reference to my own, when I did the military service. That was kind of the kind of the scenarios that we were given at the time of Soviet forces attacking through Finland in the north and then doing aerial landings around Stockholm, and that would kind of, I kind of used that, even though that was the mid-90s, but I kind of was kind of a bit fun to kind of use those, what we were kind of taught would be the scenario if this would happen. That's kind of the scenarios we trained for. That's kind of why we used them, and partly because that was kind of my knowledge, and also because it was kind of interesting to kind of actually use that actually never came to pass, but still was what we were taught back in the mid-90s. But so as for Finland, I think even though some Soviet forces might go through northern Finland, the far north, which is not very heavily inhabited, I definitely think, and we have not gone into this, I think that would be an interesting expansion in itself, Finland, because I definitely think that would be a great campaign setting as well for Finnish resistance war, which at least in my mind, is definitely going on during, whatever else is happening in Poland or Sweden. That's definitely also something similar happening in Finland. We just haven't described it. We have kind of left that also to the community. I'm not sure if there's so much cool third-party things on the Free League workshop for Twilight 2000 that I think I've seen something about Finland, but I'm not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest. But if there isn't, I think that would be a great expansion that maybe we won't have the capacity to do as an official expansion. So I think that would be a perfect third party or community thing to do.
Cool, very cool. On that note, so I know one of the concerns we had when writing Canon Plus was like the idea of some of the material ending up getting invalidated by like future modules and that kind of thing. I'd be curious, given the limited bandwidth, obviously trying to write modules for the entire world is out of the question for Free League. But would you all ever be open to the idea of almost like partnering a little bit more closely with some of the content creators, and in essence, almost like canonizing some of the fan creations that are out there?
I think so, definitely. I mean, that was kind of one of the thoughts I had when we started discussing this interview and going into this and just talking to you. That I think forging an even closer kind of relationship would make a lot of sense, and kind of yeah, canonize or whatever you want to call it to certain parts of it, definitely, and at least have a conversation about kind of how we could work more together on areas and things that we won't be able to cover in official modules. Then I think having just because there's so much great work being done, and I think we'd like to recognize that and promote that and make it more, more players take part and enjoy it. So I think yeah, definitely. I think that's a conversation we should continue having, going forward.
Yeah. Okay, I know I mean, I'm sure you all have seen the fan community is very very passionate about the setting.
Yeah,
that's great. Cool.
Yeah.
If I can, I'd love to ask maybe just a couple rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Before we close it out here. First of all, any thoughts on the UK? I know that's one that a lot of the community is very passionate about as well.
No, I mean, there is a section about the UK in the core game, and that was also one of the hottest, most hotly debated, I think, areas during the development of the game. So there is definitely what's already there, but we don't have any definite plans on a UK expansion. So I think that's also expanding on what's in the core game is definitely open for the community.
Okay, great. Let's see. Any thoughts on? And you all might be too far along with Hostile Waters, but any thoughts on the possible inclusion of hovercraft in Hostile Waters or
yes,
the future?
That is definitely a good point. It is too late to get them in there now. In hindsight, it would have been cool to have one or two. Definitely, they are, there are some amazing craft that I think would have been cool. But again, I think we did include quite a few military watercraft, but far from, it's mostly just a few examples that you can use. It's not a comprehensive watercraft guide or anything like that. So I think that's, again, something that I think, a comprehensive guide for civilian or military watercraft would be also a great, I think, Free League Workshop expansion. So, but yeah. In hindsight, one or two hovercraft in Hostile Waters would have been cool. Yeah.
Excellent. I noticed in Hostile Waters there was a very short section on surface-to-air missiles. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on possible future rules for like aircraft, either rotor wing or fixed wing.
Yes, I think since it's kind of not, we've kind of chosen throughout the development of the game to focus more on the survival aspect maybe than the full-on kind of military aspect, even though that's definitely there also. So we do have so that's why we don't have very advanced military technology, for instance. This kind of goes against the survival aspect of the game to some extent, and it also I feel can get in the way. It can be harder to kind of role play around very advanced high-level technology, because that kind of it's easier to kind of role play just with a gun in your hand than to have like a missile battery or something. It's kind of yeah. So that's one reason, but again, it's still though that's I think you can definitely expand on this a lot. And there is a short section on helicopters in urban operations, I believe. Yeah, it is. There's actually like a sidebar about a helicopter and with stats, and you can actually play it. So there is actually some rules there, not super detailed, but it's there. So and that could be used as a jumping off point to create something larger, like a aircraft expansion or something like that. I don't think we'll be doing an official one, at least not. That's not on our immediate plans. But again, that's also a good area for a third party publication.
Perfect. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't ask one out of my own personal curiosity here. So Southern Germany, I think in the official timeline in like late '98, it has the Soviets taking over 3 key cities in Southern Germany. I'm just wondering, it was unclear, I suppose, when the Soviets were stopped by some tactical nukes going off, it was a little unclear if the Soviets ended up pulling out of southern Germany or if they ended up just kind of settling into those 3 cities. I'd love it if you could provide any information on that.
Yeah. Kind of to give a definite answer, I probably need to do a little bit of quick research, but to my mind, I think there are still remnants of Soviet forces still in southern Germany. That's kind of in my head canon. That's the case, but probably that's something just to give a definite, official answer. Probably need to have a closer look at it just to make sure I'm not, saying things that are just incorrect. But that's kind of my mind, in my head canon, that what's going on.
Cool. Thank you for that. That's definitely good enough for me. And then finally, just one last question for me. Do you have any messages that you'd really want to kind of relay to the community content creators? Any concerns about what's been made so far? Any advice? Anything like that?
Good question. No, I don't know. I think just in general, I think we're watching and we're seeing what's being done, and it's really cool. So I think that's just to give, that encouragement that it's very cool to see and so much being done. And so players seem to be really enjoying the third-party content, and just I think that's amazing to see that community grow. So I just continue doing what you're doing. I think that's basically the main message from our side.
Cool. Thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of the other content creators will get a kick out of this as well.
Cool. Thank you.
I have to shoot a quick question about the upcoming expansions. You mentioned Operation Reset. Do you have anyone else you can mention of what your the roadmap for upcoming content?
Yeah. I mean, Operation Reset is the only one that kind of has a name, and that we've been kind of talking about, and that we kind of know what it's going to. We have started working on it. It's kind of it's in progress. Beyond that, I think the nearest one that we have discussed, but that's not yet in development, and that is the North America expansion, and exactly how that would look and what it would be called, and it would be like one big expansion or a series of expansions. That's still kind of an ongoing discussion, so I can't really say anything definite, but I think at least right now that would be the logical next step after Operation Reset.
That concluded my questions as well. Thank you both for your time, and I wish the best. Wish you the best. I really suck at English to make more English interviews. Have a good evening, everyone that watched, and see you next time.
See you.
Thank you both.